Okay.
Appreciate the energy here, and for me, it just is invigorating to be among so many warriors, not just the ones on the wall and the Move 9, now 7, who we're here to honor, but for those who are in the audience, who have shown through their character and their integrity that they're not going to just take this. I remember having a conversation with Suzanne a number of years ago, and she mentioned something about the Mumia movement that is applicable to MOVE and the whole struggle that we're here talking about today. And she was saying that the Mumia movement has existed longer than the civil rights movement of the 60s, the anti-war movement. When you look back on it, these struggles did not last 30 years or 40 years. They lasted 4, 5, 7, 10 years. Good, strong years, but it didn't have the continuity. It didn't have that staying power. And I think that staying power is evidence, as they say in the court, Exhibit A, of what's in people's hearts and in their minds. Because the reality is that we've heard, people from Public Enemy to the Last Poets to everybody else talk about the power of the system and how the system can buy you off. I mean, an Audi car is nice, and a lot of people will sell their mama to get one, only to have the repo man come and take it back and then put it on reality TV. I've been asked to talk a little bit about the trial that led to the incarceration of the Move 9. And while it is technically called a trial, what it really is a farce. We've heard so much today, what Janine has said and what the speakers before me have been saying, that this is a very curious time that we're living in because so many things are being exposed. The heroes that are police are being exposed for the corrupt, brutal killers that they have been for decades. In 1950, a group of Americans, predominantly black, but it was interracial, sent a petition to the United Nations. And they crafted this petition under the United Nations human rights statutes, their standards for human rights. And it charged the U.S. government with genocide against blacks. And before they laid out the case in very intricate detail, housing, voting, healthcare, employment, they talked about police brutality. And of the 8 cases that they put in at the last minute to document this police brutality, 2 of those 8 cases came from Philadelphia, from South Philadelphia. One of the lines from that petition, and I'll never forget it, it said that once the classic method of lynching was the rope, today is the policeman's bullet. Now that was put out in 1950. I was born in 1950. I am 64 years old right now, stepping towards 65, and police brutality is still a problem, and people are still lying about it. Every time somebody gets their brains blown out by a cop, or some of this other foolishness like what happened down in, where is it, Texas? East Texas, where most of the lynchings in Texas took place? Texas, in a state where they want to wipe out the Ku Klux Klan from the textbooks, wipe out lynching from the textbooks, where lynching ain't even in there. They don't even want to talk about the Klan or the Civil Rights Movement. But in Texas, where a police officer can roll up behind somebody, the person, as a person would do, seeing a cop behind him, move over because the cop apparently is doing something, need to get somewhere, and then they stop you for not turning on your turn signals on a small street with one lane. I mean, come on. This should never have been. Whatever happened in that cell, whether that young woman was murdered or whether there was contributory negligence by the police officer who arrested her and the authorities that had her there that caused her to commit suicide, it was wrong. But we never say that. We never want to recognize it. When I say we never want to do that, I'm doing the collective we of this country, because we in this room know different. We in this room know that they're liars. When we talk about the farce of these grand jury investigations, when we talk about the farce of these trials, like we had a trial recently in Philadelphia. A group of police officers, they didn't kill anybody, but they ran havoc for years, robbing and stealing and falsely incarcerating people. They could go into federal court, I'm a little disorientated here, right behind us, at 6th and Market, and walk away free. So yes, police are the problem. Yes, prosecutors are the problem. Yes, judges are the problem. Yes, elected officials are the problem. But it wasn't the cops, because the cops were on trial in that case. It wasn't the prosecutors, the federal prosecutors, despite the fact that maybe they didn't do as good a job as they could have or should have. The judge, I wasn't in the courtroom, so I don't know the kind of subtle rulings and shadings that judges do, but they so often do it, and some of it is so blatant, and then they say, well, you don't know the law, so you don't understand it. I don't need to know the law to see what you're doing. What you're doing is wrong. Exactly. But it was the jury that did that. And in federal cases, they don't take the jury just from Philadelphia. They'll go as far as Wilkesboro, in Holmesdale, in places in northeast Pennsylvania to get the juries, and those people are still blinded, thinking that all cops are heroes. No, they wouldn't do this. Despite the fact that 20 people came in and testified against them, they were all colored, and they were all criminals. Okay, but you didn't have me come here to say that. To understand why these folks are still in jail, you don't need a PhD. It's obvious why they're in jail. Janine just said it. They're in jail because they stood up against the system. But the process that led to them to get in jail is the process that we've seen so often. The process that led to that petition to be filed with the United Nations in 1950. And let's be clear, the federal government was so freaked out about that, they put a full court press on it. There was a guy who was tasked with delivering the petition to the United Nations, a guy named, help me Tony, Patterson, William Patterson, right? All right. They pulled his passport when he was in Paris. They pulled the passport from Paul Robeson, so he couldn't travel over there.
That's right.
And because of those denials of passports, lawsuits were filed, and the U.S. Supreme Court in the mid-50s said you can't jam someone's passport because you don't like their political beliefs. So that and so many other rulings just puts it right in the face of this notion that any advancement of rights for black people take away rights from white people. The reality is that all decisions that help give rights to blacks and other oppressed people help all people. The folks in my business, the news business, the one I'm so sick of now, I really want to get out of it. There's a case called New York Times versus Sullivan, and that's the case that gives the press their First Amendment rights. But where did that case come from? What came out of the civil rights movement? Dr. King's group had put a full-page ad in the New York Times. Some racist cracker in Montgomery, Alabama didn't like it, filed a lawsuit claiming defamation, and it, of course, went through the courts in Alabama, and he won. It went into federal courts all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, no, you can't do this. And it created and expanded more rights for the press. But that came out of the civil rights movement. And if you ask 100 journalists what is the roots of New York Times versus Sullivan, 99.5 of them wouldn't be able to tell you that. And that's sad. 1978, August of 78 goes back to May of 1977, which goes back to the spring of 76 when police came and killed a Move child. As was said, I was there in 78, so I know what happened. I know that it is impossible for a police officer to be shot in the back with the bullet going downward when people are in a basement, backed off the windows. And if in fact they were shooting, and you will leave that off to the side for right now, the bullets would be going up this way. And if the type of guns what they said that they had were true, those were .223 bullets, 5.56 mm bullets, small bullets, 56 grains. They couldn't hit a brick wall, ricochet off a wooden house, hit a brick wall again and come back down, they would have been shattered. In the immediate aftermath of that shooting, and it was more a shoot-in than a shoot-out, let's be clear, police denied, absolutely denied, that there were any officers on the scene that had a .223 caliber rifle. And then weeks later, they admit, well, maybe there were a few, but they were just there. They were just carrying their rifles around. They weren't shooting. And then it was like, maybe there were some people shooting, but we know who did it. Move did it. And we got 12 people. That's right. There were 12 people in that house along with the children. It wasn't just 9. Charges against one of those other 3 females was dropped within weeks. One female who was not a MOVE member but was married to, associated with a MOVE male, she went to trial, was acquitted. A MOVE member went to trial on those same charges and was acquitted. So that shows you very clearly that the evidence, at least the evidence as the state and the cops said were applied to the women, there was no evidence. So let me just run through a couple of things just to show you how structurally unfair the trial was. On August 8, 1978, when a sizable portion of the police department went out to 33rd and Powelton, there was a court order signed saying that the city was barred from destroying the MOVE house. After the shoot-in, after the extraordinary amount of tear gas that was shot in the basement, after the police department, using fire department equipment, dumped 250,000 gallons of water into the basement, the police went in and did an investigation that lasted all of 2.5 hours. Now, think about this. You're investigating a crime scene. There are no lights in the basement because there's no electricity. You just pump the water out. The last of the gas and smoke bombs may have whipped it out or may not have. And you claim that you've done a thorough investigation. Some of the weapons that were alleged to have been brought out of the house were so caked with mud that police officers had to use their feet to open up the bolts on the guns. Yet, a few hours later, when Rizzo showed weapons that allegedly came from that house, they were as clean as if you were buying them off the shelf in a gun store. Now, how did that happen? Exactly. And after this alleged investigation, which, a farce, the city brought in a wrecking crane and tore the house down. Now, that was a violation of that court order. And on that alone, charges should have been dropped and all this stuff was thrown out. How can you have fairness in a system when you destroy the evidence and you don't allow the defense to have an opportunity to do it? Now, the answer to that question, how can you do it, is because they do it because it ain't about fairness. And it ain't about justice. But they claim that it is, so let's take them at their word, although you can't and shouldn't, but let's take them at their word. So the house was destroyed, and when Rizzo was asked, well, why did you destroy the house? He said, well, we needed to tear the house down because we were afraid that MOVE people would come back in to the house, and it would become a shrine. So we had to get rid of the house. We didn't have enough police to guard the house. Well, excuse me, Mr. Liar, Mayor Rizzo, how is it that you could lock down a whole neighborhood for a month in early '78 when you would hardly let the residents who lived there go into their houses without them showing passes and ID like this was apartheid South Africa, and then you turn around on August 8th and say that you don't have enough people to keep a few protesters from coming back to that site? Farce. Absolute farce. Pennsylvania Supreme Court had said that you can't destroy a crime scene before the defense has an opportunity to look at it. Again, something that should have nullified, eliminated all of this right from the start. The preliminary hearing for the Move 9 was held at the House of Corrections, or one of them old jails up there on State Road. Preliminary hearings in terms of the law are at a stage where the prosecution has to come in and make a prima facie case. Make a case saying that something happened. And here's a little bit of proof, not a lot, but a little bit of proof. And if it's sufficient, goes to trial. If it's not, the judges are empowered at that level to throw them out. Now, we all know, or we've seen too much of when police officers are charged with abuse, it's not a prima facie hearing at the preliminary hearing, it's a full-blown trial. You remember a couple of years ago when that police officer, a black police officer, punched out that small woman and they put him on trial?
Josie.
Yeah, Josie. And he claims that he was trying to smack something out of her hand. And of course, if he did that, and he did that the way he said he did that, then that would have injured somebody else. I mean, is that police procedure? But they had a full-blown trial at the preliminary hearing, including a trial where the wife of the judge was a police officer who came to court every day in her uniform with other police officers supporting the assaulted police officer Josie, and the judge who was presiding over it didn't let anybody know that that was his wife sitting there. He violated ethics. But you know, this is how things roll. So we're in one of these hearings one day, and this was the stage where the prosecution was to put on the medical examiner, the coroner, the Quincy of Philadelphia, to say how Officer Ramp was killed. And the guy gets up, takes the stand, he testifies, and he presents his report. The prosecutor takes a look at the report, says, "Oh, Your Honor, there's a mistake in the report. The witness testified," I'm just being conversational here. "The witness testified that the wound was on the left side and it went to the right to the left, but it was really on the left side." And so the prosecutor pulls out a pencil and changes the report right in court. You can't do that. Well, no. Let me, as they say in court, let me rephrase. You are not supposed to do that, but they did it and got away with it. Now, the judge who was presiding over that hearing was a guy named Glancy. And a few years after he allowed the MOVE people to be fraudulently sent to trial, what happened to him? He was indicted for corruption. He was indicted for taking payoffs from a corrupt trade union. The prosecutor on the case, a guy named Wilhelm Nauer, after he fraudulently got MOVE people falsely convicted, he became a judge. Now, I'll probably end up going somewhere in the afterlife that I shouldn't for saying this, but probably the rules already paid for me anyway. But anyhow, within months of him becoming a judge, he dies. So the payoff that he thought that he got a different kind of payoff. So now we move forward to the trial. MOVE people, as is their tradition and their strategy and philosophy, they were representing themselves. That right was denied them. They were bound and gagged and what is it? What do you call that stuff? Gaffer tape in the courtroom. And it was just horrific. So there were backup attorneys. So the backup attorneys came in. And if you thought you saw a circus with Ringling Brothers with, elephants and tigers and fire and smoke, you haven't seen a circus until you saw that trial. The lawyers are fighting amongst each other, the lawyers are fighting the prosecutors fighting the other ones. But those procedures, or should I say lack of procedures, were so consistent of what MOVE was subjected to before that particular trial. Because before that trial, coming out of the 78 shoot-in police murder of Ram, there was a whole series of court hearings on disorderly conduct and protests and things like that. And during those trials, a judge would get up, walk out of the courtroom, and the sheriff's officers and police would beat MOVE members in the courtroom. And nobody said anything about it. MOVE would complain to the media, and the media, we don't want to hear it. The MOVE, that's the bowel movement. Yeah, that's what they said in the newsrooms. I'm not telling you what somebody said, I'm not telling you what somebody wrote about, I'm telling you what I heard with my own ears and saw with my own eyes. So the media ignored it. There was just, almost heart-turning pleas that were written to the Philadelphia Human Rights Commission from various MOVE members, handwritten notes. Please take a look at what's happening to us in the courtrooms. Letters to the president judge and the administrative judge and the mayor and the city council member, and everybody just turned their back on it. Is that fair? Is that just? Is that how a civilized society should operate? No, no, and no. Is it the way America operates? Yes, yes, and yes. And let's again remember, not too far from where we are right now is where America began, and it began with a lie. Everybody sees that president's house out there at 6th and Market where George Washington kept slaves, and George Washington deliberately broke the law, because at the time the Pennsylvania law says if a slave was in the state for 6 months, he could petition for his freedom. And at 5 months and 1 day, George Washington was putting them slaves in a wagon, taking them back to Virginia, so he could rotate them in so they wouldn't get the law. And the law being bent and broken is the way it has always been. In the MOVE 9 trial is just another example of that. So at the end of that trial, the trial went on. It was one of the longest trials in the city's history. But like I said at the outset, it was a farce. Because they knew from day one that regardless of what happened, Jesus Christ, please, I'm sorry for anybody who's Christian or whatever, I'm just making a comparison and analogy. If Jesus Christ would have came into that courtroom and become a fact witness, not a character witness, but a fact witness for the MOVE 9, he would have been ignored and, criticized, defamed, demeaned, castigated. Take any word from the dictionary in that category, he wouldn't have been believed. That's right. They were intent on railroading the MOVE people through there. Now, in terms of trial, or should I say the court system and procedures and whatnot, once you get it convicted, then you can go ahead and get an appeal, but that's just a farce too. And the appellate court judges, while they're supposed to be the smarter judges, don't believe the hype, because one of the biggest scams in the justice system is that at the appellate level, very few judges do their own research. They have law clerks that do it. And who are the law clerks? These are people who just graduated from law school, fresh out of law school. Now, I am being a little demeaning here, but these people have just learned how to tie their shoe 2 days ago. And in today's day and time, you don't even have to tie your shoe, you can get a Velcro strap to put over it. So they know how to strap their shoe on, but do they know how to pick apart truth from falsehood? Do they know that sometimes, yes, police officers and prosecutors engage in deliberate misconduct? Do they know that in New York there's a phrase called testifying? In New York City there's a phrase called testifying, and that's a phrase that's used for cops who come into court and lie, and lie, and lie again. As they say, lie like a rug on the floor. but nobody says anything about it. Buried down in the grand jury report from May 15th, 1985, that murder that took place on Osage Avenue, the Holocaust on Osage Avenue. There's a line that says, we cannot end this vast investigation by bringing charges against 2 infantile police officers who committed perjury. Excuse me. There's people in jail now for infantile practice of committing perjury. And in municipal corruption cases, you get the small person, you flip them, and you start working up the line. So there was a very crafted effort to not do anything in 1985, and with the appeals to the Move 9, is a very deliberate effort to not look at the evidence. Because again, roll it back to where I started with this. The court order that was in place not to tear the house down invalidates anything that happened after that. The charges that are on the women who are still in jail now were the same charges that were on 3 other women that came out of that house. And those charges were bogus because the police testified that the women weren't doing anything. They were holding babies, trying to keep the babies above the water where you're trying to drown them. 250,000 gallons of water in a small basement, that's trying to drown somebody.
Exactly.
That's murder. Attempted murder. So, for any and all of the above, the system is corrupt. We know it. We've known it from the time that they put the system together here in Philadelphia. And it continues. And as many of the speakers have said through the phones and up here, it is the power of the people that's going to change that around. And if we allow this to continue to happen, it's going to happen. When we start standing up, then they start backing off. But we get the feeling that we stand up, we got a victory, we're okay.
Yeah.
Boy, we got the Confederate flag down.
Hey.
But they're still treating us like niggas, so what do we got?
There you go. There you go.
So, unfortunately, this race to right wrongs is not a sprint. It's a marathon. And let me put another layer on it. It's not just a marathon, it's a steeplechase marathon. So not only do you have to run 26.5 miles, but you got to run over stuff and jump over stuff. And that steeplechase marathon race is a relay. Somebody gave us the baton, we're going to have to give that baton to somebody else. So we got to work on making sure that there's other folks who can take that baton and move it on, because it's going to be a long fight, but we can win it. Thank you very much, folks.